Welcome everybody to the session tonight. This is going to be a little bit different than you probably have been used to. For those of you that has joined us in the past, we're going to do things uh, actually quite a bit differently tonight. But just to let everybody know or remind everybody, if those of you that might not have been here from the beginning, it's kind of hard to believe, but this is our 29th session of the Reaching Out While Locked In series. So we've had a nice run. The first one was April 7th of last year. I don't think anybody would wish the circumstances on us that it took to get us to this point, but hopefully those of you that have been able to join us have enjoyed what we've been able to get accomplished with the educational efforts through this program. I know a lot of you have utilized it for your CAPE education, and a lot of you have been here almost every single time. But just to kind of get things started, I guess we've been through quite a lot of changes since last April. I think that it's pretty obvious. I went from short hair to long hair. Haven't had a haircut since the pandemic and going here for a little bit longer. Uh, we had some other changes. Dr. VanValin went from a brand spanking new specialist last year to now quite a seasoned veteran, I think, in this whole uh, during this process, Katie. It's been kind of fun to watch your maturity over that time period. We've had some other changes. Dr. Lehmkuhler, for those of you that don't know, has moved from an associate professor to now a full professor. Would also like to congratulate Dr. Lehmkuhler for winning the Whitaker Award this year for outstanding extension programming. So congratulations to Dr. Lehmkuhler on that. Dr. Anderson, I don't think is on with us yet, but Dr. Anderson, he's made a big change. He went from when this whole thing started as being just a plain old daddy to now he's a granddaddy. So, and I know I see Kevin smiling, and Kevin's wondering what the heck's coming for me. And Kevin, you know I've got to go there. Kevin went from basking in the glory of LSU's football national championship to, well, we won't even say what's happened with LSU football here recently. So sorry, had to go there, Kevin. But we've all had, I think, like I say, it's been a productive year, if not the best year. And so we would like to wrap it up, at least for now, with this session to answer any questions any of you guys have. Just to let you know, all the ones that are on tonight from a specialist standpoint that I've at least seen is we have Dr. Burdine with us. Of course, Kenny covers all the marketing ag econ kind of information. We also have Dr. Henning with us, Dr. Jimmy Henning. Thanks, Jimmy, for joining. And everybody knows Dr. Henning. He's our forages man. So if you have any forages type questions, be sure and catch him. Now, I haven't seen Dr. Anderson yet, but it doesn't matter because we have a superior replacement in Ben Kreitz is on with us, and Ben, of course, helps with our IRM programming and is also in the process of getting his PhD in reproductive physiology. So I think quite a capable substitute for Dr. Anderson. So, but he's not a granddaddy yet. So he can't give you any advice there, but he can help you out with your repro. So let me just start it off with, if anybody has any questions, you can either type them into your chat, or you're welcome to unmute yourself and just sort of state your name, and we'll try and get you identified, and then you can ask your question that way, whichever way is most comfortable for you. Then please do, and it can be directed specifically to any one of us, or it can be a general question, and we'll decide either who answers it, or if nobody volunteers, I'll delegate who gets to answer it. How's that? So type your questions in if you have any. Of course, with these types of things, we always get concerned that people are shy and don't chime in. So I'm going to start this whole process off while you're either thinking or typing your questions in with just a little bit of information that I've been getting a lot of emails on recently. And that is that that about the genomics programming for the new CAPE program, that genomics testing is required if producers, if your county is using 2021 money, then the bull does have to be genomically tested in a manner that you get genomically enhanced EPDs. So there's commercial tests out there, and just getting a commercial test does not qualify the bull. You need to talk to your breed association or the breed association of the bull that is under consideration, and that breed association can give all the details on how to get the proper test so that you get the genomically enhanced EPDs, and that's what it takes to qualify. And so that's been a bit of confusion for some folks. And so if you have any other questions, though, talk to your A&R agent, and they can get a hold of me, or you're free to email me directly if you'd like. But your first stop should be your breed association. I think Katie let me know that we also have Dr. Josh Jackson on tonight as well. And so anything, facilities or structures and things like that, I'm sure that that Dr. Jackson would be able to help you out with that as well. All right, looks like we have one coming through. So first question, what is the best way to discuss the difference and benefits of spring versus fall calving? It's a good question. I tell you what, to me, that's always one that has to do, probably as much to do with nutrition as anything. So I'm going to turn that one over to start with Dr. Lehmkuhler or Dr. VanValin and let them fight over it.
Well, I'll start because I'm going to throw it right to Dr. Burdine. As we think about part of the management decisions, it has to do with the market and when we might be able to capture significant premiums on the market side. So Dr. Burdine, just real quickly from a seasonal feeder calf standpoint, maybe just review that and how that weighs into some of the decisions.
Yeah, so just the pure price, the pure price effect I'll talk about first, hand it back to Jeff. But I tell folks, if you're calving in the fall and selling wean calves in the spring, on average, those calves are going to sell for $10 to $15 per hundredweight more in the spring. So that's going to be a $50 to $75 advantage on a per head basis for calves. I'm going to add this too, though. We tend to sell our cull cows when we sell our wean calves, and sometimes you forget in a fall calving herd also get the benefit of moving those cull cows on a stronger spring market. And that's similar, usually about 10 cents difference. And remember, that's on a 12 to 1,500 pound animal, right? So you get the benefit both of about a $50 to $75 higher calf value. And then the cull cows you do move are going to sell for $100 to $150 more in the spring of the year as opposed to the fall.
And then one of the big benefits that we talk about all the time, and particularly Ben, this would be more in your neck of the woods on reproductive success and the increase in reproduction in fall calving versus spring calving.
So Dr. Lehmkuhler, that's a really good point. When you talk about spring versus fall, breeding in the spring or breeding in the fall, when we think about our typical spring breeding season in a March 1 calving date, that's breeding on May 22nd. And then as we go throughout there, and as you go through June and July, typically the conception rates tend to really decrease. And as you move, from May, June, July, there's a 10 to 15% decrease in conception. And Roy did some really good work. Dr. Burris and Dr. Anderson did some really good work down in Princeton showing that. And then conversely, when you look at breeding fall cows and you're breeding that Thanksgiving and early December, and of course you don't have that heat stress. And I'd much rather breed fall cows myself than breed cows in the heat and in the early summer.
And then Dr. Henning, we have really kind of a wash, in my opinion, on some things when it comes to nutrition, because we've got the opportunity to manage some forages in the fall to provide the nutritional needs for the cows. So I'm thinking stockpile fescue, and so how that fits into this fall calving window.
It really does. When I think of that, or I think about that question, I just want to make sure that that you've got stockpile tall fescue, or you've got a good set of hay or haylage to feed when the winter gets bad and you've got cows that are with calves on their side and lactating. The flip of that, of course, in the springtime, you've got grass everywhere. If you can get bred early, then you do avoid that summer slump. But it's in the popular press, it's kind of the spring calving is going with the biological cycle, right? You've got a lot of grass when you need to breed and milk. The problem for us, of course, is tall fescue, and I do think it is, like you say, it kind of balances each other out a bit.
So Dr. VanValin, the only really big struggle that I have from a nutritional standpoint is ensuring that the calf gets the groceries that they need. And because we've got cows that are going to wind up hitting peak lactation, typically about the time when, we're thinking about that breeding time that Ben mentioned in November, December. And if we run out of stockpile, we're going to wind up getting it to the point where these calves nutritionally are going to rely a lot more on the forages that are out there. And by the time that calf's 3 months of age or so, you're only getting about 50% of the nutrients from mama's milk. So that forage becomes more important. And if we just have average fescue grass hay, that may not allow us to meet the genetic potential that those calves have for performance, and we might wind up falling short. So what can we do in that situation, Dr. VanValin?
Yeah, one of the things that we do with our herd in Princeton, and is certainly an option for some producers as well, is feeding corn silage throughout the winter, or part of that winter feeding period at least. That's going to provide a pretty energy dense feed stuff to those cows as well as the calves as well. We certainly see calves coming up to the bunk to get some of that silage when it gets put out there too. So there are some other options out there to help make sure that those calves get some extra nutrients out there, during that winter season.
And we can use creep feeding for the calves. And, I think that's an underutilized tool. I think when we talk about creep feeding, a lot of times we're thinking about a grain mix, but you're utilizing a really high quality forage in a quote unquote creep pen can be a way that we can increase the nutritional plane of those calves through a forage. A good grass clover or alfalfa orchard grass hay can be used and help supplement those calves along. And so there's my attempt to pull in a lot of our folks to try and answer a simple question, but it's not that easy, because you really do need to look at all the areas of management and what fits your resources and time management the best. And, personally, I think the weather is just a whole lot nicer to calve in September and October than it is in March and April.
Yep, I was going to point that out too. Kevin, I saw you.
Well, I think that's exactly, I was just going to make sure that point was made, and Jeff made it. Yeah, definitely a weather advantage, the calve in the fall. The only thing we have found, a lot of folks have gone to fall calving, especially in Western Kentucky, is you can get probably most of your calf mortality is going to come at the very beginning of your calving season. And Ben can touch on that. There's probably a physiological reason why, but we can get calves born too early at the beginning of that calving season. And I think it's heat related, if I'm not mistaken, Ben. And so you really got to be on the front end of your calving season with fall calving. Maybe September 15th might be a better start date maybe than September 1, because you're going to get some August calves. And they're going to be little, and they're going to probably be a little too small gestationally. I mean, premature, that's what I'm trying to say. So just beware of that.
Yep, I was going to bring up that point, Kevin, that's about the only thing that didn't get mentioned was you do get a little bit lighter calves in the fall, little easier calving. Now, I don't want that to ever be the reason somebody does fall calving, because we can do that through our genetics. So that doesn't need to be your reason, but just another consequence of fall calving anyway. All right, Ben, you're up again, buddy. If I synchronize my cows and then AI them on the 31st of May and only one round of AI, when can I turn my cleanup bull on the herd?
Sure. No, thanks, Dr. Bullock. Really good question. And you kind of answer this in two ways. One, you could turn your bull out the day you breed your cows, right? That certainly is an option. If you really wanted to know who the sire was on those calves, and without running a genomics test, Dr. Bullock, then the other answer there is to wait about 7 to 10 days before you turn the bull in with the cows. And typically that's the way most folks go, and typically what we see a lot. You may have a few cows, if you turn them in on that day, theoretically, or just 1 or 2 days later, theoretically, there shouldn't be any cows coming into heat for that bull to service. But that isn't always the case, and there may be some cows that ovulate a little bit later that don't conceive to that AI, that would conceive if the bull was in just a few days after. So I really like to wait that 7 to 10 days. Any cows that come in heat early, right? And we know the average estrus cycle is 21 days, but can come in as early as 17 days. So any cows that come in heat early, if the bull is already in there and he's ready to go. So I typically like to wait at least a week.
Yeah, and Ben, on the genomics test, and if you do it that way, and particularly if I agree with you that to go ahead and get the bull out there fairly soon. And if you have one that's borderline, just get a parentage test on that if you're a seed stock person and need to have accuracy on that sire.
Right, and still, it's even waiting 7 to 10 days to turn the bull out. You can have those cows that calve 2 weeks early, or 2 weeks late, and it comes to be a question, and particularly in the seed stock industry. Really need to know the parentage, and sometimes required to even register a calf. So.
All right. All right, it looks like somebody wants you to be a prognosticator, Kenny. When is the price of feeder calves going to catch up with the price of fertilizer, fuel, and other expenses?
I have to assume the question comes from the premise that calves aren't high enough to cover those costs right now. Two ways I'll answer this. Number one, remember that the value of calves is not dependent on what it costs to produce them. And that's a bitter pill to swallow. But the truth is the value of calves that we sell is driven by their eventual value as feeder cattle and fat cattle. So just understand that going in, that it's not like we don't have a cost plus system to price cattle. The simple answer to your question though is that happens when profitability gets such that we start liquidating the cow herd and we have fewer cows in production, smaller calf crops. Now that takes some time. And, we're in I guess this will probably be our third year of herd liquidation. So I do think we're seeing beef cow numbers drop some, but frankly, they're dropping slower than I thought. So it just takes time. The other piece of this that I would add is remember that there's just so many more things that affect cattle prices than cattle numbers. So economists for years talked about cattle cycles. We had policy in place where grain prices stayed fairly steady. Trade was fairly predictable. U.S. consumption was generally growing for a period of time. And, we simply had a fairly predictable, I won't say predictable, but we didn't have the kind of volatility that we have now. Remember, there are so many things that can rain on these feeder cattle prices. And, this is the perfect example of it. Last year we had to deal with the black swan event, COVID-19. Things looked way better back in spring of this year. And then you look at what's happened to grain prices over the last few weeks. We've added about $1.50, $2 to corn prices in the last few months. Folks, corn prices twice right now, spot market, what it was last summer. You cannot build something like that into these markets and not see the kind of impacts that we're seeing.
All right, thanks, Kenny. So the answer to your question is just wait around and it'll change, right? Not much that's one of those things that's hard to do anything about anyway. All right, back at you again, Ben. If you sink a group of heifers, inseminate them, and some return to estrus within 17 to 23 days, and you do not breed them, how soon can you start a new sink program again?
All right, so this is another really good question, and and really can apply to cows or heifers, right? So both we can really treat the same in this instance. So if you're not able to breed on that return, and we know that things happen, and we're just maybe not able to breed them or get tied up that day or something along those lines, and want to resynchronize them for that next go around, and we didn't turn a bull in. So ideally, if we just say we'll just work off the average, right? So if they come in heat on day 21, so now that's starting the new heat cycle. So that's day 0 again. So if you're going to use a 7-day seeder, then I would wait a week and put that seeder back in on day 7, and then leave that seeder in for 7 days, and you're removing that seeder on day 14 of her new estrus cycle. It's just number wise that works out very easy. You can cheat it a little bit and go a few days earlier than that. I really wouldn't want to put a seeder back in, any earlier than probably 4 days after estrus, just because you're gauging and the time window of that corpus luteum, and will that CL regress when you give a shot of prostaglandin or a shot of luteolise, and if that heifer is at day 10 to 12, or day 10, 12, 14 of her estrus cycle, and when we're administering that prostaglandin, we have a very good probability of regressing that CL and that heifer coming back into heat. So to make the math easy, I would wait a week after you see that heifer in estrus.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Looks like I get one here, or at least I can start. I don't know if Kenny has a comment here too. How can the beef industry justify the higher live cattle pricing for Black Angus beef, especially when compared to Red Angus beef? We won't get into the breed specific because the market isn't really looking at breed. It's specifically looking at coat color. And I'll answer it in a very, very clear way. You can't. The beef industry can't justify paying that much more for the black cattle over the red cattle. But the fact of the matter is that they do. The thing I try and remind everybody is the coat color gene controls one trait, and that's coat color. Doesn't impact birth weight, doesn't impact cavities, doesn't impact weaning weights, doesn't impact milking ability, doesn't impact any carcass trait whatsoever. The only thing that it impacts is coat color. And so can you justify then paying whatever the price difference is, Kenny, 10 to 15 cents a pound more for a black feeder versus a red one? No, not if you want it from a physiological, biological, scientific standpoint. But the fact of the matter is that is how the market's working, and so you do have to take it into consideration, even if you are frustrated with the fact that the industry shouldn't be, that shouldn't be the practice of the industry. The point is that it is. Kenny, any comments on that?
I thought you answered it perfectly, Darren, better than I would have. Let me add 2 things too that I'd like to point out. Some of the work that I've done with feeder cattle pricing, and the question may have been more about fat cattle, but if the question is more about feeder cattle, a lot of this really does come down to having uniform groups. And when you've got a uniform group of blacks and a uniform group of smokes, when you've got truly apples to apples comparison, the only difference is hide color. The difference is less, and the price difference is less than what we oftentimes see reported in the marketplace. And lot size makes a big difference in Kentucky. And the only real reason I think that, the only justifiable reason that I will say that sometimes we do see some differences here locally are, if I've got a very small group of black cattle that go through the yards by themselves, understand the buyer's got to find some cattle to go with those, right? And it's a lot easier to find some other black cattle to go with those and group them than it would be if they were different color cattle sometimes. So I agree with Darrh. It's not justifiable, but sometimes it comes down to lot size and just how many are likely to be at the yard that they're sold a given day.
Thank you, Kenny. All right. I have 6 weight calves that I may do retained ownership at the depressed future prices and feed cost. Is this the year to sell feeders?
That one for me too.
It's,
I got it there. So the first thing I'm going to say is that, anytime we get a question like this, I would like to run an actual budget and value 6 to 8 calves, make a feed price, make a feed cost estimation, look at transportation costs, and work through a break even. So that's what I'm going to suggest is that Chuck, reach out to me and we'll do that. Let me say a few things though, just in general about this situation. Number one, understand that the value of feeder cattle really is a derived demand, meaning it's driven by their expected value as finished cattle and what it's going to cost to get them there. So the fact that feed price has gone up and feeder cattle price has gone down really may not mean that the retained ownership potential has changed that much, right? So we kind of look at those things dynamically. I'll also say this: I am not a proponent of retained ownership most of the time, and I'm just being blunt about it. I see more red ink than black. I'm not saying it didn't work. Folks that have got good cattle that they know a lot about that do well on feed, sure, they'll do well. But I'm biased by what I see, and I see a whole lot more red ink than black. The only other thing that I will say is, I don't know the time frame here. If it's Chuck, I think we're probably talking about later this summer. So I think that's good. I would not do anything right now just because I can't get my head around these feed markets right now. And they're just so volatile right now. I'm going to be really hesitant to make any commitment, whether it be putting cattle on feed or booking something right now, just knowing what we're seeing on the feed price stuff. I just simply think we need some time to get some stability before I make a long-term decision like that. So if it's a decision I'm making the next week or two, I'm going to err on unloading the cattle and just living with that for the short run.
Kenny, that's a good point about not making decisions too quick on calves that might be sold in that October, November, because the corn future price is really softened for those late futures. And so you look at the impact of that on those feeder calf prices, and we're at 149, 150 almost on those futures. So I think that's a really good thing. And the other thing I would say though is that it should give you the time to be thinking about alternative feeds as well. Maybe we can be thinking about some feeds we haven't typically used, like hominy or wheat mids or something else that might be more cost effective that we can get our hands on.
I'm going to prove that I have the world's worst timing, and Kevin, I want you to, if you don't mind, to kind of tell them we have the program out there where we're kind of I'm not going to say supporting or whatever, but we do have the program that you're in charge of, the PVAP, in terms of some marketing options for folks. Do you want to just remind everybody about that program and what they need to do to participate?
Yeah, the PVAP program has 2 options. And it's what we're trying to do is encourage folks to do something post weaning, whether it's the precondition option, which is option 1, or a feedlot option where we actually send these cattle to Iowa in what we've been doing and retain ownership all the way to slaughter. We're into this program, about 2.5 years now. I've got to agree with Kenny as far as it's been tough to feed cattle all the way through to finishing here in that time period. Our first set in fall of 2019 did fine, but then they hit COVID and the price depressed. But since then, we've had some pretty significant losses for the folks who have retained ownership all the way through finishing. Now, on the precondition side, it's been a different story. This past fall wasn't quite as high returns as we wanted, but overall, from at the time we've had this program, folks have averaged about $70 per head net added return if you just precondition from weaning and put them in a preconditioned sale. Preconditioned roughly about 60 days. So both of those options are there for people who have never done it before. And we've got some incentive money for folks who complete either one of those programs, a little incentive money to help you, to stimulate your interest in doing it. So contact your county agent. County agents know about this, and we'll be glad to set you up with either option. But again, back to the feedlot deal, it's a pretty tough deal to look at on paper right now. So
I think maybe a point to make there is this program is really good, particularly if you can get in with some of those groups like the Hardin County group and all, Kevin, to where you can test it. If you're thinking about getting into retained ownership, it's a lot better to do it with 5 or 10 head, with a group of other people now before you throw your whole herd that direction.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Darren. And yeah, that's what I try to encourage people to do. Just 5 or 10 head, get your feet wet, see what, it'll give you a chance to see what all this is about. If you go through our program, which is really, we're basing it off of what Hardin County's been doing for 13 years, Doug Shepard and them, you'll get lots and lots of information on your cattle as far as feedlot and carcass data. That part's invaluable. But if you're going to go after that just to add value and to add money to your bottom line, that's probably not the right motive on the front end. You probably need to dip your toe in the water and see kind of, okay, how good are my cattle? Can I feed cattle all the way to slaughter? And just see, how do I come out? Again, to make a slow decision, back to what Kenny was saying, more long-term decision in the future, but it will give you a chance to get a thumb sketch of what your cattle are like.
It's also imperative that you get the right genetics in those cattle too, if you're going to go that route. And with the genetics, with the tools we have with EPDs and particularly the carcass traits that are highly heritable, you can produce good top end cattle. Now that's still, even top end cattle don't always make a lot of money, but there's no excuse for not hitting up at, in the market in terms of your percent choice and things like that with all the tools that are available from a genetic standpoint.
Yep.
All right, good deal. Sorry. I had to get off of the repro stuff for a little bit, Ben, but coming back at you again. So where was it, Mr. Yoder? There we go. Some research was done at Texas A&M which show that essential fatty acids given at the time of AI plus 30 days showed an increase in conception rate. Any thoughts?
All right, thanks, Irvin, for bringing this up. I will try to take a stab at this and give you my thoughts, and then I'll also pass it along to Dr. VanValin and Lehmkuhler to provide their input as well. But my initial thoughts on this would be that it's really that increasing the plane of nutrition right when we're trying to get those cows pregnant. And I would have thought that it really would have been, and I'm not familiar with the study that you're talking about, but I would have thought it would have been prior to starting the breeding season and been 30 days before rather than 30 days after the time of AI. If you think to here in Kentucky and trying to mitigate some of the effects of tall fescue and the ergot alkaloids when we're trying to breed cows in the spring, whether that's done with something like mixed 30 or feeding whole raw soybeans, I guess could maybe be similar to what you're getting at here. But Dr. Lehmkuhler and VanValin, by all means, I would love your input here as well.
Yeah, I know some of that data, and again, I don't know exactly which one of the studies. They did a number of studies with a variety of different treatments and supplementation strategies down there. But I know some of them looked at basically by supplementing those fatty acids, you're able to kind of modulate the milk synthesis for that cow. And basically it decreases the energetic cost of milk synthesis. And so you can get earlier ovulation, which can help with some of the conception rates and that kind of thing. There's also some other data that might suggest maybe some anti-inflammatory type properties, changes in some of those reproductive tissues as a result of supplementation. Dr. Lehmkuhler, do you have anything else to add?
No, we did a lot of that soybean work back when I was in Missouri in grad school many years ago. And I'll just say that it's not a silver bullet. In some years we saw a nice response and in other years we didn't. The other thing is that Dr. Johns, and I think it was Les, did a really nice study here on spring calving cows at the research station that were on fescue. and they received either mixed 30 bin, like you mentioned, or soy hulls to provide nearly the same calories of supplementation. And so in that work, there was a significant improvement in the cows that were getting more of that fat type supplement than the soy hulls. So I think, as Dr. VanValin indicated, it's probably more than just a plane of nutrition and energy. And I don't know that we fully understand the exact mechanisms, and it could vary depending on the status of the cows and what other forages they may be dealing with. If it's Toft Askew, there may be some endophyte issues there, or if we're on a non-endophyte field, those responses may be mitigated or not as prominent.
All right, guys, thanks a bunch. Next one, and I'm not sure, Kenny, you might want to stab at this. I'll give it a little shot. Does a wart on a calf affect sale price at the market? In my opinion, a wart or a few warts, no. Now, I've seen cases where they were just completely ate up with warts, and that's just from an aesthetic standpoint. It's just any reason to be able to not give you top dollar is probably going to happen. And so if they were just completely covered in warts, I would think it would have a negative impact. Kenny, I don't know if there's enough data on that to even know the true real effect.
There's nothing I can share or cite to put a dollar value on what you're talking about, but I do think it comes down to how significant it is, right? A wart or two in a group of cattle, probably not going to get noticed. I've seen a lot of pictures, though, of much more significant warts, right? And when you get into that situation, that calf's going to get pulled off by itself. So in addition to it having some visual issues, it's selling as a single, not in part of a larger group, and it's going to get hit pretty hard.
If I can add something here, if you start seeing warts on some of your calves, be pretty proactive and get those warts knocked off. I mean, if it's just an odd wart or two, you can knock them off with a pair of channel locks. When you do that, and this is something you can do, is turn that wart around, rub that wart back into that bloody spot that it came off of. You want to try to get and kind of inoculate that wart back into the system. Now, you'll hear some people say you can put a balling gun down the throat. There's no proof that works. Wart vaccine works really well. So if you can catch those 2 or 3, it usually starts with 2 or 3 calves, but you can catch them quick, then you'll keep it from spreading through a group of calves and becoming a problem where it gets to where it's actually a discounted situation. So, but anyway, yeah, just be proactive on it.
The thing with warts is it's not a whole lot different per se than us, and it seems to be whenever we get a stressed immune system. So when you have those calves that are heavily warted, the concern is that maybe their immune system isn't as strong either, and so they're more likely to get sick. So that's another reason maybe to see a discount on those calves that are really heavily warded.
All right, there you have it. Don't have warts. All right, so Jimmy, I hope you're still with us, buddy. We got one for you. Are there any reasons other than cost or availability of seed to consider non-BMR trait sorghum Sudan grass?
Well, good question. And of course, BMR, it stands for the brown midrib trait. That's a naturally occurring mutation that leads to less lignin or altered lignin and higher digestibility, usually in our summer annuals. About the only reason I can think of is, and you listed 2 good ones, cost and availability, and seed availability is an issue with the summer annuals for freight reasons and seed production reasons. But if you knew a lot about, if you had a traditional non-BMR summer annual that you knew a history on and a yield history on that was proven versus one that was not, then you could lean that way, and I could justify that. But wherever possible, we want to try to find a good yielding BMR type summer annual. So that's my answer. Happy to have anybody chime in with experience that you might have had.
All right. Thank you, sir. Um, I'm not sure who wants to try jump on this one. Are we seeing more consumption of beef with the decline of COVID-19 in the U.S.?
I
I
can take
haven't.
a stab.
There you go, Katie. Thank you.
So, based off some of the NCBA numbers, I wouldn't say that there's been a shift in terms of overall beef production due to COVID, but there was absolutely a shift in terms of where people were getting that beef from. And what I mean by that is there was obviously a shift from more food service type beef consumption switched over to more retail home consumption uh, with the pandemic. Also, and I don't have the slides handy, otherwise I'd show them because it's kind of a cool Google search. But if you do a Google search for the number of times that things like local beef were searched for last year, you see a dramatic increase in the number of times that people search for that. And one of the things that was interesting, they break that data out by state. Kentucky was the third highest in terms of the overall change in the number of times that was searched for. So the magnitude of change that was searched for. So it's just a little fun fact for you. But I think it was more a switch of where people were getting their beef, perhaps, versus an overall consumption number.
And I'll just add, I seen something in a popular press article a few weeks ago, and they were talking about restaurant returns of sales. And Ruth Chris, as an example, they indicated that they were still almost 35 to 40% below where they normally were pre-COVID. So I think that the restaurant trade is ticking up, but it certainly has not fully recovered.
All right, I have an anecdotal thing just to share since we're on the meat consumption thing, because my daughter told me about this today. Uh, Her and a friend were having dinner last night and cooking at home, and the friend had bought a steak from Kroger and had cooked it, and she said it looked like pork to me, and he wasn't very satisfied with it, and I had been to Kroger earlier that day, and I know that they had eye of round steaks on sale, and I think that this young fella went and bought an eye of a round steak and cooked it, grilled it, and was dissatisfied. So most of us in the beef industry, that's not surprising, but it might be good for the beef industry to get some of these people back in restaurants and stop eating at home because just the ability of the normal consumer to prepare beef properly, and particularly when they're looking for bargain cuts, is sometimes not the best idea. So just thought I'd throw that one out there.
Let me add something to, if you don't mind there, just real quick.
Absolutely.
So the question was generally about consumption. And I want to make this point that consumption is really a measure of supply. And folks don't always think about that, right? But whatever we produce is going to get consumed. The question is where and at what price. It might be at home, it might be restaurants, it might go overseas, it's going to get consumed. So the general consumption question really comes down to, are we going to produce more or less beef in 2021? The answer is we're probably going to produce less beef in 2021 because one thing we've got a bit fewer cattle on feed throughout the year, I think, than we had last year. But remember too, what is this expensive corn going to do to the finished weights on these cattle second half of this year? All right, we're gonna slaughter some lighter cattle than we did last year. You put those two things together, I think consumption actually may go down in 2021. Not necessarily a bad thing. It just means I think we're going to produce less in 2021.
Excellent point, Kenny, because that always baffles me, about that very point, because we do eat everything. So yeah, that's a great point. All right, just real quick, Dr. Lehmkuhler's throwing in an advertisement break. He's saying that if you wanted to see more about like the retained ownership that on the Beef Bits podcast that he hosts, Kevin, Doug, and Matt talked about retained ownership through that Iowa program. So if you need to get on there. Do you have a site for that, Jeff, or do they just Google Beef
They're,
Bits podcast?
they're all on our animal science website, and or they can get it through their iPod or wherever they get their podcasts. But if you're looking for info, they can go to our animal science website and find them there.
Yep. And one of the emails I sent you guys a couple of weeks ago, I included all the different sites that we had, the videos, where the podcast, where all that is. So go back and find that. And I'll try and remember and do that this coming week when we sort of send you the closeout of this program for now. I'll send you I'll try and send all those links to you as well. All right, Jimmy, Dr. Jackson came with a question for you. If I have 100 acres of hay ground, my fields want 260 pounds of DAP per acre and 180 pounds of potash per acre. With fertilizer prices being the way they are, I can either apply half of what it needs across the whole farm, or two, provide half the farm with exactly what it needs and ignore the other half of the farm this year. Which option is better from a hay yield standpoint?
When I saw that question, I contemplated leaving early. It's really a long answer, but I mean, I started writing down some thoughts. Number one, I don't know that either one of Josh's solutions is really going to be the best, because you've got to develop a strategy that looks like this. You know, you need to fertilize. You're going to get better yields on the better ground. So where's the good land, right? So I'd look at that. You know, what's the highest value forage that you've got growing on the farm? And I'd make sure that one was taken care of too, because that's going to pay your bills. And there is I know that when you, for our soil test levels, putting the fertilizer where the fields are have the lowest test numbers are going to give the most return on investment from fertilizer, which may go against putting fertilizer on the better land, because better land by definition may have higher fertility. But those are considerations that you have to look at field by field to know what you need to do. The other thing that Josh doesn't say is this a grass or is this a legume? And chances are with that much DAP, and he didn't talk about urea at all, then maybe it's an alfalfa field. That's a pretty low phosphorus test, and phosphorus is directly related to yield. So, you're between a rock and a hard place, but putting on a little bit across the whole farm is probably the weakest option. Developing a strategy to target some, high value fields, good land, and fields that have a low test, because that's where you're going to get the big return. And just to kind of sign off on this one, you'd have to say that on some of those fields that tested medium or medium better than medium, just let them go. Just let it go.
If I can translate, I think Jimmy said buy a better bull, right?
Exactly. Genomics will fix it.
There you go. All right. Here's another one. I have 20 acres of hill ground that's been row crop for the past 10 years. What do you recommend I sow this fall to make it a permanent hayfield?
I should have left. Well, first thing, you want to make sure, you got to figure out what kind of fertility is in the field, but, get the soil test, figure that out, get it limed, have a strategy for that. And you got to know, what are you going to do with this hay? Is it going to be fed on the farm? Is it going to be a cache hay situation? Fed on the farm. And if all things were equal and I could put this in anything, I would look really strongly at the novel endophyte tall fescues. We've got fields that are 10 years old and still going pretty good. So with a little care, they're going to last longer than almost anything else besides Kentucky 31. And frankly, Kentucky 31 out of the bag that you get at the co-op may or may not have that much endophyte in it. So that's going to be a consideration. And if it's going to be a cachet situation, then you could look at any one of the traditional options, whichever one you think you can get cured and sold.
Excellent. I think you did fantastic, Jimmy.
All right, I'm going. See you.
No. Now, that's all I see for the questions now. If you still have a question, please go ahead and type it in. I would like to see if any of the other specialists have any other kind of things that they want you to be at least thinking about I gave mine at the beginning, thinking about here as we go into the late spring and summer. We are, as I think I mentioned, we're going to take a bit of a break from the webinars. And then I guess later on in the summer, we're going to get together and kind of decide based on what's happening with your opportunities to get your local education at your extension office and some other things. We're probably going to keep this format up at some level, but probably a reduced level from what we've been doing over the past year. So, but we'll provide those plans for you probably later on in the summer and let you know what's happening in that regard. Folks, y'all have any last minute sort of comments you want to leave them with, since we're going to have a little bit of a hiatus? Not that we're going anywhere. You know how to get a hold of us, and we're always here to help. And your A&R agent there in your county is absolutely there ready to help, and can always get a hold of us with any specific questions you have as well. Don't everybody jump at once.
I'll just say that we'll continue to do the off the hoof and make announcements on events that are coming up. So be sure to reach out to your extension agent, or again, those are posted on the Animal Science website as well. But anything that comes along that may be a special program that we're going to do online or something along those lines, we'll be sure to have it in the events section on Off the Hoof. And also, if you haven't been going to the Animal Science website, on the right-hand side, there's kind of an upcoming events. And if you click on the beef side, we'll have those and anything there that's even in counties that, maybe Dr. VanValin or Dr. Burdine or somebody that's going to be talking on market outlooks. We put that up there. So just be watching that, and we'll try to communicate that way. And other than that, everybody have a safe spring. Everybody's going to get really busy, and there's always accidents when we let our guard down, and we certainly don't want anybody getting hurt this spring as we get into the fields and making hay and planting corn and all that.
I'm going to jump in real quick because fortunately somebody reminded me of my boneheadedness again, and forgot to give you a CAPE code. So the CAPE code is the same as your password to get in tonight. So that's just capital UKB as in beef. So UK beef, capital UKB, and the rest of it small letters. So I put it in the chat box. So that's the CAPE code for any of you that need that. And as a reminder, you put that instead of the signature of the presenter on those forms, put in that CAPE code and work with your county agent to get that credit. Katie, any closing thoughts, or Ben?
I'll just put a plug in. We're going to keep up with some of the Beef Minutes videos and that kind of thing throughout the summer as well, with timely tips, as well as updates on research projects that we might be doing and that kind of thing. So those will be on our Facebook page as well as the Animal Science website.
All right, I messed up again. It's UK bull. I'm sorry, but I tell you what, either one will work. If you put UK bull or UK beef, either one will work, I assure you. So don't worry about that. Okay. Also, Katie, just real quick, I don't know that you have any plans, but you've been doing a lot of the basically retained ownership type stuff. In other words, from the carcass side of things and all. That program, any new developments on that?
Yep. So Master Finisher will be a program that's going to be offered this fall. So be on the lookout for updates in terms of exactly what those dates and times and all of that will look like as I continue to finalize what that program is going to look like this fall. But that'll be something that's coming down the pipeline for this fall. So for anybody interested in finishing cattle, whether that's we may touch on some retained ownership or feeding cattle on your own farm. Whether you've never done it before and you're just interested in learning more about it, or maybe you've been doing it for a little while and want to hopefully pick up some additional information, we'll have that program this fall.
Yep, looking forward to that. I just couldn't remember the name of it. Ben, really appreciate you stepping in for Dr. Anderson tonight. I don't think it was a step down at all. If anything, it was a step up. So we really appreciate it. Any closing comments?
I don't think so, Dr. Bullock. I was glad to hop on and answer a few of those questions this evening.
All right. Guys, I'm not going to keep you in here longer than you want to be here. I haven't seen any other questions. Okay, here's one real quick. Are there any opportunities for custom feeding? Dr. Lehmkuhler, you are shaking your head. I'm going to let you take this one.
Kevin, that would be through your PVAP, correct?
So I was wondering if they were talking about more statewide on that.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is, custom feeding for like as a tenant owner type deal. I don't know if this is necessarily retained ownership. And we've got some of that kind of going on with our big backgrounders across the state. A lot of that goes on in Western Kentucky, some custom grazing. I don't know exactly what they're asking specifically.
Yeah, but I'm not aware of anybody that's doing any actual custom feeding.
So Teresa, there were, you'd have to look out and I'll give you some examples. There were some of the larger feed yards were in the state a few years ago looking for folks that were interested in custom feeding or custom backgrounding calves for them. And so there are some opportunities potentially there, Teresa, to look at backgrounding some of those calves in this region. I don't know how strong it is today. That was about 5 to 6 years ago, but I'm sure there's still opportunities out there because the trend for these yearling type cattle to go in the yards is increasing, or certainly in a higher demand than those young lightweight calves. So reach out to us individually and we can try to help you get linked up on that.
All righty, good deal. All right, guys, I appreciate everybody being on and helping out tonight, all the specialists, and I appreciate all the participants too. You guys have stuck with us. I've seen some of the same names on here the whole time, and we appreciate it. Always appreciated our A&R agents and all that they do to help out as well. So thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Have a great rest of the spring and summer, and we'll be in touch with more programs and hopefully be seeing you out in the counties here in a little while as well. So take care, and everybody be safe and see you soon.